Have you ever seen someone going through really tough times and you watch the way they respond and you think, there is no way known I could respond like that? You know, those challenging moments where they just seem to have a peace, or they just seem to get through it with this amazing attitude. I've been watching the Olympics recently, and just watching the athletes in the interviews before the events and when they compete, they get through it in such an incredible way with all the pressure of the world on them. I was reading a passage of scripture that reminds me of this whole idea of seeing people go through something with an attitude completely different to the way I would. And there's one passage that comes to mind, and it's two guys that Jesus has just ascended. He's ministered, and he's ascended to heaven, and he's sent the disciples out to do all the work that he's calling them to do, and to minister and to heal and to spread the good news. And I want to share a story about two people, Paul and Silas, and what happens to them and the incredible attitude they have. I'm going to read from Acts chapter 16, verse 22. It says, "A mob quickly formed against Paul and Silas, and the city officials ordered them to be stripped and beaten with wooden rods. They were severely beaten, then they were thrown into prison. The jailer was ordered to make sure they didn't escape. So the jailer put them into inner dungeon and clamped their feet in stocks." These guys who had just been bashed are now in stocks. And I want you to get this. Verse 25 says, "Around midnight, Paul and Silas were praying and singing hymns to God, and the other prisoners were listening." That passage blows me away, not because of what happens to them, because so many of the disciples get beaten and bashed, but their attitude at midnight, and they're singing hymns and they're praising God. The attitude they had in the midst of captivity, in the midst of torture, in the midst of chains. They didn't whinge, they didn't whine, they didn't worry, but despite their circumstances, they chose to worship. They made a decision to have a different attitude. Just recently, in the last month, my dad has passed away. Dad was living in Melbourne with Mum, and it was very sudden. And I got a phone call very early one morning to say that my dad had passed. And so the very next day I jumped on a plane with Kaz, my wife, and we went down to Melbourne. And we grieved together with my mum and my sister, and my youngest daughter was down there, and then we planned the funeral. And it was a really, really difficult time, as you can imagine, when you're not expecting that to happen. And I was very, very close to my dad. My dad was my hero. So a really, really tough time. And then the day after the funeral, we jumped on a plane and we flew back to Brisbane, and we had to go into 14 days of quarantine lockdown in a small hotel in Brisbane. It was incredible. It was so challenging for us in that situation to be in an environment where we were just locked down with nowhere to go, nothing to do, in the midst of our grief. There was no fresh air. We had people knocking at the door and running as they were leaving us our meals. We had to make a decision about how we were going to get through our grief, locked down in hotel quarantine. Now, lots of people were complaining, very negative. There was stuff going up on social media in a real negative way about these lockdowns. And Kaz said to me, my wife said to me, she said, "Muzz, we have to make a decision about how we're going to get through these next 14 days. And so what she decided was, let's look at things differently. Let's react differently to the way that we're feeling right now. And so what we decided to do was try and see the funny side of each day and find something new and something funny that we could look at and laugh about. We decided to react differently. In fact, if you want to see how we reacted, check out Kaz's YouTube channel. She's got a channel called On the Quarantine Couch, and we did a little video diary of what was happening and some of the funny things that were happening. And we had hundreds of people subscribe and loved it, not because of the crazy things that were happening, but I guess it was because of our attitude and the fun nature that we had with it all. You see, we had a decision to make, and we decided to have a different attitude. So let me ask you, what situation right now do you need to choose to have a different attitude, to change the attitude that you're currently walking with? Maybe it's that family member that every time you're with them, things blow up, and it's time for you to change your attitude to the way you see them. Maybe it's that meeting that's coming up that you're really nervous about and you're scared and you're fearful about. Maybe you need to change your attitude about that. Maybe it's that conversation you need to have, or that fellow worker that you see every day and you feel things rise up in you when you see them, that you've got to change your attitude about that. Maybe it's those financial pressures. Maybe it's that relationship that you're in. What is it that right now, as I speak these words, that you realise I need to change my attitude about that. I need to choose my attitude about that. Over the past, I've led a lot of leadership development groups and some leadership workshops, and we picked up on a fantastic leadership attitude statement that we found by Chuck Swindoll. And we got all of the students who went through our leadership course to memorise it. And I want to read it to you right now, because it's a great way of talking about how important our attitude is. And it goes something like this: the longer I live, the more I realise the impact of attitude on my life. It's more important than education, than money, than circumstances, than failures and successes, than whatever someone might say or do. It's more important than appearances, giftedness or skill. And the remarkable thing is that we have the choice to create the attitude that we have for that day. You see, we cannot change our past, we cannot change the way people act, we cannot change the inevitable. The one thing we can change, the only thing we have control over, is our attitude. And then Swindoll finishes with this. He says, I'm convinced that life is 10% what happens to me and 90% how I respond to it. So let me ask you this question as I close. What do you need to check your attitude on today? What's that thing that you need to see differently so that you might be different when you're in that situation and you're in that circumstance? Hey, I'd love to continue the conversation, keep it going. Feel free to make some comments in the comment section below. If you haven't subscribed to this YouTube channel, make sure you subscribe and hit the little alert bell so that you know when the next ones are coming up. But I want to keep the conversation going, so please make some comments and let me know what it is that you've recognised and realised you need to change your attitude about. God bless you. Have a great day.